What would you do if a desperate father and his 4-day-old baby were stranded at the airport, denied boarding because of a strict airline rule? Joy Ringhofer, a 78-year-old volunteer, didn't hesitate to offer an extraordinary solution. Ruben Swift stared at the airline ticket agent, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The sterile, fluorescent-lit environment of the Phoenix airport suddenly felt like a suffocating cage. I don't understand, he stammered, his voice cracking with a mixture of disbelief and rising panic. She's 4 days old. I have all the paperwork. The custody order. The agent, a woman with a name tag that read Brenda, offered a practiced, yet ultimately unhelpful smile. Sir, I understand this is frustrating, but Frontier Airlines policy is very clear. Newborns must be at least 7 days old to fly. It's for their safety. Safety. Ruben's voice rose an octave. But I just got custody. I have to get back to Ohio. My life, my daughter's life, is waiting for me there. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, feeling the weight of the past few weeks crushing him. The legal battle had been grueling, a relentless tug-of-war with his ex-girlfriend, Sarah, over their unplanned child. He'd poured every ounce of his savings, every spare moment, into proving he was a fit father. Now, standing here on the precipice of finally starting their life together, he was being blocked by policy. Brenda's smile tightened slightly. Sir, I can offer you a voucher for a future flight, but I cannot allow you to board with a 4-day-old infant. Perhaps there's a family member who can assist you. Ruben felt a cold dread seep into his bones. Family? He had no one in Arizona. He'd flown in from Cleveland, a city he now desperately needed to return to. His freelance graphic design work allowed him some flexibility, but he couldn't afford to be stranded in Phoenix for 3 extra days. Hotel costs, food, baby supplies, it would all add up, draining the meager funds he had left. And more importantly, he feared the consequences of delaying. Sarah had been vehemently opposed to him having custody. Any perceived misstep, any delay, could be used against him in court. He pictured his daughter, Ru-Andria. He'd insisted on the unique spelling, nestled in the hospital bassinet, her tiny face a perfect blend of his and Sarah's features. He'd only held her a handful of times, each moment a precious, fragile connection. The thought of not being able to hold her, to care for her, filled him with a primal terror. There has to be something, Ruben pleaded, his voice laced with desperation. A manager? An exception? Brenda shook her head, her expression softening slightly, a flicker of genuine sympathy crossing her face. I'm truly sorry, sir. I wish there was something I could do. Perhaps you could call someone from the hospital? A social worker, or maybe... Ruben's mind raced. He'd barely spoken to the social workers during the rushed transfer of custody. He remembered filling out endless forms, signing documents, the whole process a blur of legal jargon and overwhelming emotion. But one name, one face, did flicker in the chaotic landscape of his memory: Joy. Joy Ringhofer. She'd been a volunteer at Banner University Medical Center, a kind, elderly woman with a warm smile and eyes that crinkled at the corners when she spoke. He remembered her briefly, a fleeting interaction amidst the whirlwind of the hospital. She'd offered him a comforting word, a cup of coffee, and a small, knitted blanket for Ru-Andria. A simple act of kindness, but in his stressed and sleep-deprived state, it had resonated deeply. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. He scrolled through his contacts, desperately searching for the hospital's number. He found it, dialed, and after a series of transfers, finally reached the volunteer coordinator. Joy Ringhofer? The coordinator repeated, her voice echoing through the phone. Yes, she's one of our most dedicated volunteers. Let me see if she's on shift today. Ruben held his breath, the seconds stretching into an eternity. The airport noise, the announcements, the chatter of travelers, the rumble of luggage carts, faded into a dull background hum. His entire world narrowed down to the voice on the other end of the line. She is here, the coordinator finally said. Would you like me to connect you? Yes, Ruben whispered, his voice hoarse. Please. The phone clicked, and a new voice, warm and gentle, filled his ear. Hello, Joy, Ruben said, his voice trembling slightly. This is Ruben Swift. We met at the hospital. I have custody of my daughter, Ru-Andria." He paused, unsure how to explain his predicament. "Ruben? Of course, I remember you. And little Ru-Andria. How are you both?" Joy's voice was genuinely concerned, filled with a warmth that instantly eased some of Ruben's anxiety. He took a deep breath and plunged into his story, the words tumbling out in a rush of desperation and hope. He explained the airline policy, his lack of family in Arizona, his fear of losing custody. He poured out his heart, his vulnerability laid bare to a woman he barely knew. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Ruben braced himself for rejection, for a polite but firm refusal. He wouldn't blame her. It was an outrageous request, a burden he had no right to place on a stranger. But then Joy spoke, her voice clear and resolute. "Stay right where you are, Ruben. I'm on my way." Ruben blinked, stunned. You are?" "Yes," Joy said, a gentle chuckle in her voice. "Don't you worry about a thing. I'll be there as soon as I can." He hung up the phone, his mind reeling. He didn't know what to expect. Was she going to help him find a hotel? Offer him a ride? He couldn't imagine what she had in mind, but the simple fact that she was coming, that she hadn't dismissed him out of hand, filled him with a fragile, flickering hope. Joy Ringhofer carefully maneuvered her vintage Buick LeSabre through the afternoon Phoenix traffic. The sun beat down on the desert landscape, turning the asphalt into shimmering waves of heat. But inside the car, the air conditioning hummed a gentle tune, and Joy felt a sense of calm purpose. She'd just finished her volunteer shift at the hospital, a place that had become a second home to her over the past decade. Joy had always loved children. She'd raised 3 of her own, and now had 5 grandchildren, all scattered across the country. Her husband, Frank, had passed away 5 years ago, leaving a gaping hole in her life. Volunteering at the hospital, particularly in the maternity ward, had filled a part of that void. Holding the tiny newborns, offering comfort to new mothers, it reminded her of the precious, fleeting miracle of life. She thought about Ruben's phone call. His voice, thick with desperation, had tugged at her heartstrings. She remembered him, a young man, clearly overwhelmed, but with a fierce love for his daughter evident in his eyes. She'd seen that look before in the faces of countless new parents. The vulnerability, the fear, the overwhelming joy. Joy had no hesitation in offering her help. It wasn't a conscious decision, a weighing of pros and cons. It was simply an instinctive response, a deeply ingrained impulse to help someone in need. She'd lived a long life, seen her share of hardship and loss. She knew that sometimes all it took was a small act of kindness to make a world of difference. Besides, she had a spare bedroom, perfectly clean and ready. It had been her daughter's room, years ago. The pink wallpaper, adorned with faded butterflies, might be a bit outdated, but it was cheerful and welcoming. And Joy had plenty of baby supplies left over from her grandchildren's visits. As she pulled into the airport's short-term parking lot, Joy felt a flutter of anticipation. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she trusted her instincts. She knew, somehow, that this was going to be more than just a temporary arrangement. Ruben spotted Joy immediately. Her silver hair, pulled back in a neat bun, framed a face etched with kindness and wisdom. She wore a simple floral dress and carried a large, worn tote bag that likely held everything but the kitchen sink. He rushed towards her, Ru-Andria cradled carefully in his arms. "Joy, thank you. Thank you so much for coming," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Joy smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's no problem at all, Ruben. Let's get you 2 settled." She peered at Ru-Andria, her face softening. "Oh, she's beautiful," she whispered, gently touching the baby's cheek. The drive to Joy's home was filled with a comfortable silence. Ruben was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. He leaned back in the passenger seat, watching the suburban landscape roll by. Joy's house was a modest, single-story ranch-style home, with a well-tended garden filled with cacti and flowering shrubs. It exuded a sense of warmth and tranquility. Once inside, Joy showed Ruben to the spare bedroom. "It's not much," she said, gesturing around the room, "but I hope it will be comfortable." Ruben looked around, his eyes welling up with tears. It was much. It was more than he could have ever hoped for. "It's perfect," he managed to say, his voice thick with gratitude. Joy helped him settle Ru-Andria in a bassinet she'd set up near the bed. She showed him where she'd put the diapers, wipes, and formula. She even had a small, rocking chair in the corner of the room. "I used to rock my babies to sleep in that chair," Joy said, a wistful smile on her face. "It always seemed to work like a charm." Ruben watched her, amazed by her generosity and her calm, reassuring presence. He felt a wave of relief wash over him, a sense of safety and security he hadn't felt in weeks. He was still stranded in Arizona, still facing an uncertain future, but for the first time since arriving at the airport, he felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone. As Joy left the room to give him some privacy, Ruben looked down at Ru-Andria, her tiny chest rising and falling with each gentle breath. He stroked her soft cheek, feeling the warmth of her skin against his fingertips. He had a lot to figure out, but in that moment, surrounded by the faded butterflies on the pink wallpaper, he knew he wasn't alone. He had Joy, and for now, that was enough. The first day was a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and naps. Ruben, still reeling from the stress of the past few weeks, found himself constantly on edge, worried about every little thing. Was Ru-Andria eating enough? Was she sleeping too much? Too little? He peppered Joy with questions, his anxiety palpable. Joy, with the patience of a saint, answered his questions calmly, reassuring him that he was doing a great job. She showed him how to properly swaddle Ru-Andria, how to burp her, how to tell if she was hungry or just fussy. She shared little tips and tricks she'd learned over the years, her wisdom a calming balm to Ruben's frayed nerves. In the evening, as Ru-Andria slept soundly in the bassinet, Joy made them a simple dinner of chicken and rice. They ate at the kitchen table, a small, round table covered with a checkered tablecloth. The conversation was hesitant at first, punctuated by long silences. But slowly, gradually, they began to open up. Ruben talked about his struggles with Sarah, the pain of the custody battle, his fears about being a single father. Joy listened without judgment, offering words of encouragement and support. She shared stories about her own life, about raising her children, about the joys and challenges of motherhood. "It's not easy, Ruben," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But it's the most rewarding thing you'll ever do. And you're not alone. You have Ru-Andria, and you have me for now." Ruben looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Joy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Joy smiled. "You would have managed," she said. "But I'm glad I could help." The second day brought a new challenge. Ru-Andria developed a slight fever. Ruben panicked, his anxiety flaring up again. He wanted to rush her to the emergency room, convinced that something was terribly wrong. Joy, however, remained calm. She checked Ru-Andria's temperature, felt her forehead, and listened to her breathing. "It's just a little cold, Ruben," she said. "Nothing to worry about. Let's give her some infant Tylenol and see how she does." Ruben was skeptical, but he trusted Joy's experience. He watched anxiously as Joy administered the medicine, her hands gentle and sure. He paced the floor, his nerves on edge. Hours later, Ru-Andria's fever broke. She woke up, fussier than usual, but clearly feeling better. Ruben felt a wave of relief wash over him, so intense it almost brought him to his knees. He hugged Joy tightly, his gratitude overflowing. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for everything." That night, Joy taught Ruben how to sing a lullaby, a simple, sweet melody that her own mother had sung to her. They sat together in the rocking chair, Ruben holding Ru-Andria close, their voices blending in a soft, harmonious duet. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated connection, a moment that transcended their circumstances, their differences, their ages. The third day was bittersweet. Ruben knew that their time together was coming to an end. He called Frontier Airlines again, and they confirmed that he could rebook his flight for the following day, waiving the change fees. He was relieved, but also strangely saddened. He'd grown accustomed to Joy's presence, her warmth, her wisdom. He'd come to rely on her, to trust her, to feel a sense of family he hadn't known he was missing. They spent the day packing, preparing for the journey. Joy made sure Ruben had everything he needed: diapers, wipes, formula, clothes, even a few small toys she'd found in the attic. She packed him a bag of snacks for the flight, a small, thoughtful gesture that brought tears to Ruben's eyes. In the evening, they sat on the porch, watching the Arizona sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange, pink, and purple. Ru-Andria slept peacefully in Ruben's arms. "I don't know how to thank you, Joy," Ruben said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've saved us. You've given us more than I could ever have asked for." Joy smiled, her eyes twinkling. "You don't need to thank me, Ruben. Just promise me you'll take good care of that little girl. And promise me you'll stay in touch." Ruben nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He promised. The next morning, the air was thick with a mixture of relief and unspoken sadness. Ruben had packed his bags, carefully organizing everything Joy had given him. He felt a pang of guilt, knowing he was taking so much from this kind woman who had asked for nothing in return. Joy made them a hearty breakfast of pancakes and eggs, a final act of nurturing before sending them on their way. Ru-Andria, oblivious to the impending change, gurgled happily in her high chair, smearing mashed banana on her face. As they stood at the door, ready to leave for the airport, Ruben turned to Joy, his eyes welling up. I don't know how to say goodbye," he admitted, his voice trembling. Joy smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You don't have to say goodbye, Ruben. Just say see you later." She reached out and gently touched Ru-Andria's cheek. "You be a good girl for your daddy, little one," she whispered. "And you," she said, turning to Ruben, "you be a good daddy. You already are." Ruben hugged Joy tightly, a long, heartfelt embrace. He felt a lump in his throat, a mixture of gratitude, sadness, and a strange, unexpected sense of loss. He was leaving a part of his heart behind in this small, unassuming house in Phoenix. The drive to the airport was quiet. Ruben held Ru-Andria close, feeling the warmth of her small body against his chest. He thought about Joy, about her kindness, her generosity, her unwavering support. He knew he would never forget her. At the airport, the check-in process was smooth. The Frontier Airlines agent, a different one this time, was understanding and helpful. Ruben felt a surge of relief wash over him. He was finally going home. The flight to Ohio was uneventful. Ru-Andria slept for most of the journey, nestled in the carrier Ruben had purchased. He watched her sleep, his heart filled with a mixture of love and protectiveness. He was a father, a single father, with a daunting task ahead of him. But he wasn't alone. He had Joy's words of encouragement echoing in his mind, her spirit a guiding presence. His apartment in Cleveland felt strangely empty after the warmth and coziness of Joy's home. But he quickly set about creating a space for him and Ru-Andria, a place where they could build their life together. He unpacked the bassinet, the diapers, the clothes, the toys, all reminders of Joy's incredible generosity. The first few weeks were challenging. Ruben struggled to balance his freelance work with the demands of caring for a newborn. He was sleep-deprived, constantly worried, and often felt overwhelmed. But he persevered, driven by his love for Ru-Andria and by the memory of Joy's unwavering faith in him. He called Joy regularly, updating her on Ru-Andria's progress, sharing his triumphs and his struggles. Joy always listened patiently, offering words of encouragement and advice. She became a virtual grandmother, a source of comfort and support across the miles. He sent her pictures and videos of Ru-Andria, her first smile, her first steps, her first words. Joy cherished each one, printing them out and displaying them proudly on her refrigerator. 2 years later, Ruben kept his promise. He and a now-toddling Ru-Andria boarded a plane back to Phoenix. Ru-Andria, a bright, curious child, chattered excitedly about meeting Grandma Joy. Joy was waiting for them at the airport, her silver hair gleaming in the Arizona sun. When she saw Ru-Andria, her face lit up with pure joy. She knelt down, her arms outstretched. Ru-Andria, initially shy, hesitated for a moment, then ran into Joy's embrace. It was as if they'd known each other forever. The reunion was filled with laughter, tears, and a deep, abiding sense of connection. Ruben watched them, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He'd found a family, an unexpected, unconventional family, forged in a moment of crisis and bound together by love and kindness. They spent a week with Joy, exploring the desert, visiting the zoo, and simply enjoying each other's company. Ru-Andria adored Joy, following her around the house, listening to her stories, and showering her with hugs and kisses. As they prepared to leave, Ruben knew that this wasn't goodbye. It was just another see you later. Their lives were intertwined now, their hearts connected by an invisible thread of gratitude and affection. Ruben had changed, no longer the somewhat lost and unsure young man. This journey fortified him. He started a support group for single fathers in his area. He understood the feeling of being alone in a difficult situation and decided to pay Joy's kindness forward. Joy, in her twilight years, found renewed purpose. The connection with Ruben and Ru-Andria filled a void she hadn't realized was so vast. She continued volunteering, her story inspiring other volunteers and the families they helped. The story itself had legs. Ruben, encouraged by Joy, shared it online, initially anonymously. It resonated deeply. People were touched by the simple act of human kindness, the unexpected connection, the triumph over adversity. It was shared, commented on, and eventually picked up by local and then national news outlets. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the most challenging circumstances, the human spirit can prevail. The story ends, not with a grand finale, but with a quiet affirmation of the power of human connection. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places, and that kindness, like a ripple in a pond, can spread far beyond its initial point of impact. It shows the transformation, not only of individuals, but a community inspired to do better, to be better. The ending is open, implying that this is not the end of their relationship, and their story will continue.